Hi, I'm Mike Cavanaugh. This is another edition of Cavanaugh's Corner, our labor talk show in southern Maine on public access television. We're in the state capitol today. This is Augusta. This is the State House behind us. And the reason we're taking our show on the road today is because there are some issues of great importance, we think, to working people that are going to be debated today in the legislature. And that is a couple of bills that would raise the minimum wage in the state of Maine. Maine's minimum wage is now $4.25 an hour. And today the legislature's Labor Committee is going to be holding hearings on two bills, one which would raise the wage to $5 an hour, the other which would index it and tie it to inflation, essentially for cost of living adjustments in the future. So this is an opportunity for us to take our camera crew, all of Richard and me, on the road up to our state capitol to see how the people's business is being done. And we'll have an opportunity, we hope, to talk to the sponsors, to listen to some of the testimony, and to interview some of the people who are here to talk about Maine's minimum wage and what it would mean for our economy, what will it mean for our workers. So follow me and let's go on inside and see what the legislature's got in store for us. Ready to go?
Just a couple quick points. Again, I don't want to, you're going to probably hear testimony about let's wait and see what the federal government's going to do. We heard that testimony 2 years ago on health care, and we see what the federal government did on health care. I say it's up to us to take care of Maine people. If Washington comes along on raising the minimum, we're trying to retard what I consider progress in this country as far as wages and benefits for workers. You'll hear those arguments today. There's been plenty of fact sheets you've been given already. The information that you received to date, I think there's some excellent facts and figures in there. I don't want to belabor all that now. There's a lot of, again, I want to give the public the time to speak today. And again, I just want to emphasize I strongly support increasing the minimum wage. I don't want this to be seen as a substitute for that. I hope we can do both. But again, that'll be up to the committee and the full legislature, of course. So, without taking a lot of time and letting the public speak, if there are any questions, I'll try and answer them. Otherwise, I do have a committee hearing myself, so I appreciate Senator Chair letting me speak first. Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other co-sponsors? Before we go into the others, let me simply explain that the committee has agreed that there will be three categories: proponents, opponents, and those neither, who wish to simply add information to that. And we will do that. I was waiting for introductions of the committee and hoping that we would have a few more, but at this time, before we get into the accepting the proponents, I will simply ask the committee to please introduce Chase.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Gail Chase. I'm a representative from District 106. I live in the town of China. I represent Albion, Benton, China, and Unity Township. This is my second term in the legislature and my second term on the Labor Committee.
I'm Representative Tom Windsor from Norway, District 68, towns Norway, Westgarth, Greenwood, and Waterford. And this is my first term on this committee.
Stephen Joyce from Biddeford.
Pam Hatch from Skowhegan, District 98. This is my first term on labor.
Chuck Begley, Senate District 16.
Roland Sampson, representative from the town of Jay, first term.
Bob Pendleton, state representative from Durham and Scarborough, District 22.
Vaughn Stedman, representative from House District 108 in southeastern Somerset County, down in Hartland.
Henry Joy, District 141, Christopher.
Before we ask the proponents or anyone else to testify, there is a sign-up sheet on the rostrum. We do ask you, please, to put your name down and whatever other information it calls for. The clerk is responsible for that information to the information office, so you'll be helping her, not necessarily the committee, so please do that. I may remind you before or after you testify. After you testify, would you please wait for a moment or two to see if any of the committee wishes to question you. We will open it up then. We have heard the sponsor. We will open it up for those who wish to speak as proponents of this bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Hillard. I'm an economics professor at the University of Southern Maine. I have copies of my testimony here for the members of the committee. Good afternoon, Senator Bagley, Representative Hatch, and members of the committee. I'm going to speak to two issues briefly here. There's a more detailed elaboration of my remarks in the written testimony. I want to talk, first of all, about the erosion of purchasing power of the minimum wage over the last several decades. If you get a chance, if you could look at the second page of my testimony, there is a table there that gives data on what's happened with the minimum wage, the value of the minimum wage, since the 1960s. And the main point I want to make is that the minimum wage, federal minimum wage, in the 1970s had a purchasing power in current dollars of $5.75 an hour approximately. It is now down to $4.25 an hour, so this represents a decrease, substantial decrease over 1/4 in its value. The reason for that is that since 1980, there's been only one increase in the federal minimum wage. That was in 1989, and it raised it over 2 years. And because of that, there's been a significant decline in the value of what a minimum wage salary would bring. The thing that I want to emphasize here is that any of the increases under consideration here would not represent a long-term income gain for the workers who would be affected. It simply makes up for some of the loss they've had over the last 2 decades. So, for example, if that increase was to $5 an hour, that would shrink by 1/2 the income loss due to inflation over the last 2 decades. Second thing I wanted to speak about is just to make a quick review of studies that have been done on the income gain and job loss due to increases in the minimum wage. There's a large body of research looking at both Maine and the U.S. It shows that if increases in the minimum wage are modest, which is the case with the proposals that you will be considering, income gains are substantial and job losses are either very small or negligible. I'll speak about the specific studies in a moment. I just want to make a couple of related points. In a growing economy such as we have now, whatever job losses would be experienced would actually show up as simply a slower rate of growth of employment. And so it wouldn't be an outright or direct job loss. And the other thing is that many of you will probably have as a question in your mind, well, if you raise wages that businesses face, won't that naturally cause significant job loss? Because there's a lot of talk to the effect that that's what happens. But the thing to keep in mind is that, and this is what is supported by the research, the instances where the minimum wage is increased in a modest fashion are not unlike a lot of other fluctuations in business costs of the sort that happens when there are, say, increases in gasoline prices, energy costs, or common example these days would be changes in interest rates. Large-scale increases in the minimum wage are a different story, but when you're talking about these modest increases, they're the sort of changes in costs that businesses adjust to as a fact of life. They may not be happy about it, but they tend not to change in a radical way their operations, including how many people they employ. In the testimony, particularly in a footnote at the end of the testimony, is a summary of a good deal of research that's been done nationally. There was also a study done in Maine 10 years ago, commissioned by the Maine State Senate, which looked at the questions of income gain and job loss. They all pretty much find the same thing. If you look at the example of the Maine study, their estimate from a modest increase in the minimum wage was very large increases in income and very small job losses. And the way they figured it out, and I think the way that you can think of it, is that there was a $100,000 income gain for each job loss from raising the minimum wage. The income gain was direct income increases for workers affected by the change in the minimum wage. But there are other effects as well. In a lot of industries, particularly retail, there's a relative wage scale within businesses. An increase in the minimum wage leads to adjustments in the other wages above the minimum. So there's also effects on business as well in terms of greater purchasing power of workers whose wages have risen. The national studies, including a number of recent ones done by economists at Harvard and Princeton, again find marginal or no losses of jobs. There are a lot of high-quality studies that have recently come out because of recent increases in state and federal minimum wages over the last 10 years, which has given them good data in which to make very careful judgments about the impact of the increase in minimum wage. And if you review the details of my testimony, it spells out again and again and again, you find pretty much the same thing. Perhaps very small job losses for teenagers, and they don't find significant job losses for any other age group, rather. So if I can conclude, I think there's a pretty straightforward case for raising the minimum wage in the state, simply to recoup some of the lost buying power that's been lost to inflation over the last 2 decades. I know many of you are going to worry about whether or not this is going to produce job losses, but I think the findings that I summarize in my testimony should give you some peace of mind. It's been looked at very carefully, and this has not been found to be a problem by the most recent and best available research. Finally, I just want to emphasize that Maine needs to be thinking about a high road for developing its competitiveness into the next century. Trying to rely on very low wages as a way of attracting or keeping business is not a direction that's going to be successful. Most of the mobile industries that seek low wages have left this state a long time ago, 10 years or more. We're not going to attract them in a world that has economies like the People's Republic of China or Mexico with far lower wages. And so I think that emphasizing low wages and worrying about keeping the minimum wage where it is really part of the low road strategy that we need to put aside. So I end my testimony here.
We've been told approximately 20,000 Mainers earn minimum wage. In any of your research, have you discovered any type of disparity between male and female? How is that proportion between male and female workers, these 20,000?
Well, all of the research on the minimum wage population shows that the predominant group by gender is women. I know that nationally, I believe it's 62% of minimum wage workers are women. So if you're trying to look at a comprehensive strategy to raise the conditions of single mothers, then raising minimum wage would be one way that would have a very strong effect.
Thank you.
Committee. My name is Sharon Trita. I'm the state representative for District 91, which is Gardner and part of Randolph. I apologize for missing my cue and not standing up in the co-sponsor category. I am a co-sponsor of both of the bills that you will be hearing today on the minimum wage. And I've also passed out to you an excerpt from a bill that is still in the revisor's office that has a section dealing with minimum wage, which is a bill that I am a prime sponsor of. That bill deals with welfare reform, but there is a whole section also dealing with the minimum wage, which I anticipate you will be having an opportunity to take a look at. So I thought that you might want to see that today at the same time that you're hearing the other minimum wage proposals and have it as part of the mix when you sit down to work session. I'm here today to talk to you about welfare. And I know that you may think you're in the Labor Committee, and that's the committee that deals with work, and you probably thought you didn't have to deal with welfare at all. That was the committee up on the 4th floor, the Human Resources Committee that deals with that big problem. But I'm here to tell you that there is a very direct relationship between the minimum wage and welfare policy in the state, and the fact that we have many people who are on welfare in the state of Maine today. I have worked on the issue of welfare reform now for about 4 years since I came to the Maine legislature, and have done a lot of research in it, in the whole subject. And I would say that I've come to the point of view that we are not going to solve our welfare problem at all in a comprehensive way unless we address the issue of the minimum wage. Surely that's not the whole solution to the welfare problem, and I'm not suggesting that it is. But it is a piece of that problem, and I believe that...
We're outside the hearing room right now for the Labor Committee, which is holding a hearing on bills that would raise Maine's minimum wage. We have the opportunity here to take a quick interview with two of the proponents who have spoken in favor of this legislation, Representative Sharon Treat of Gardner and economics professor Michael Hillard of the University of Southern Maine. Let me just ask you both. Sharon, you just spoke a minute ago about the connections between minimum wage and welfare.
Right.
And could you just describe that in
Yeah, sure.
3 strokes for us?
Yeah, I was just trying to make the point that right now the minimum wage is so low that it's not enough for someone to support their family if they're single parent. Even two parents working full-time minimum wage can't really make up the amount of money that's needed to pay for child care, health care, transportation, and of course housing, clothing, and all the rest. So the point I was trying to make is that we spend a lot of time blaming, quote, welfare mothers for their problems, but really we have a system that pays people so little that they have no choice but to look to the welfare system to get assistance to survive.
That's, you made that point very well inside. I hope the committee pays attention to it.
So.
And Mike Hillard, from the Economics Department of the University of Southern Maine, you talked inside about the lost earning power of the minimum wage over time. You want to sort of describe that very briefly for us?
Well, I will in a second, but let me start with my other point, which I think is just as important. In the press, what you'll hear a lot of is complaints from business lobbyists and others that if you increase the minimum wage, that all kinds of people, teenagers especially in restaurants and so forth, are going to get thrown out of work. There have been a lot of studies done by Ivy League economists and the like, taking advantage of the fact that the minimum wage was raised recently, both federally and in a number of states. And they were able to come up with very surprising findings that basically no jobs are lost with the possible exception of teenage workers, and there it's so small that it hardly shows up on the screen. So on the other side, not only are the relatively small group of people working the minimum wage benefited, but people who work $1 or $2 an hour above minimum wage tend to have their wages increased as well because employers want to maintain the relative space between them. So the economics of it, the thing that I think will affect most people and concern most people is the fact that we have not been raising our minimum wage nationally or in the state to deal with the fact that inflation continues to eat away at people's living standards. So in fact, the minimum wage now really is worth not even 3/4 of what it was worth in the 1970s. The bills that they're talking about now are talking about raising the minimum wage maybe 75 cents an hour or just indexing it to inflation, which would mean smaller increases. That doesn't represent going back and increasing what it is that people would be earning at minimum wage. That's just reducing the loss that they've incurred from inflation. So an increase in the minimum wage to $5 an hour cuts the loss from the 70s in half. And if you're trying to talk about minimum wage as a basic piece of Maine's commitment to equity and economic justice, it's a very, very small token of trying to do something in that direction.
I think this, our viewers will find that this is a hearing on a bill that, if it's passed, will help put Maine on the move. We hear a lot about Maine being on the move. The question is whether or not those 21% of Maine workers who are at less than the $5.75, the real value of minimum wages today, or what the real value should be, will also be on the move out of poverty and into our economy. So.
And one last thing, if you're thinking about talking to a legislature, this doesn't cost the state budget $1.
Well, in fact, the conclusion that I came to is it might save the state some money because some of the people who are right now relying on the welfare system to get additional funds to basically make it through the week wouldn't be having to draw down from those welfare funds, and they can go into other things like job training that we really need to get people off of welfare so they have the skills to have really good paying jobs.
And viewers, you heard it here first. Raise the minimum wage in Maine, put Maine on the move. Thanks a lot. Thank both of you for your testimony. And we're going to go back inside and listen to some more of the proponents, and I suspect we'll have a chance to hear some people who might oppose raising the minimum wage. So thanks again.
Sure.
Richard, let's move it on inside. Can we do that?
For a year and a half now. I've got another year to go, which is kind of hard because it's supposed to be a 2-year program. But I'm making it work because I definitely need a job that pays enough to raise my family. Because being on public assistance isn't enough either. So you have to make ends meet and you do whatever you can to do that. So, thank you.
Back outside the hearing room here in Augusta with the hearing for increasing the minimum wage, I'm joined by Stacy Rollins. Stacy's from Skowhegan, Maine, and is somebody who has had some experience and currently has experience working at minimum wage. Want to tell our viewers, Stacy, about what your situation is and what you found as far as child care in particular?
Well, working minimum wage at 40 hours a week only grosses $170 a week, and my child care is $150, which you don't clear enough to cover my child care expenses.
So you're somebody typical of a situation where people say, you know, get a job, be productive, go out and join the workforce, got to take care of your children.
It's just not realistic.
Can't happen.
No, not with 3 children. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, and that's, is there anything particular about you said Skowhegan. Child care expenses a lot more in Skowhegan than someplace else? No, actually, where I have my children, it's cheaper. I only pay $50 a week per child, and most people are at least charging $60 and up for each child at a daycare. So I got really lucky. Okay. Well, there's certainly a policy question for our state to be considering as we encourage people to transition to work. Somebody's got to be taking care of the kids, and right now, under the circumstances, it would take all you earn and more just to take care of your children so you could go to work. Right, and then there'd be nothing left for your bills. Nothing. And can I just ask you, how did the legislators that you spoke to, you just testified here in front of a number of senators and representatives, did they ask you any questions about that? Did that seem to be news to them? Yeah, one lady asked me what my situation was and what I really needed, and I told her that, you know, I need more at a minimum wage job to pay for child care. It's really hard on $4.25 an hour. Yeah. I'd say probably impossible. Stacy, thank you for coming up to Augusta and helping out in this effort. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. And we'll go back inside and listen to some more testimony about whether or not Maine should raise its minimum wage. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to some of the people who oppose the idea. And on your behalf, I'll ask them that question about how would they pay for child care if they were minimum wage workers. That's a good thing to give them. So, okay, let's go do it. Thanks, Stacy. Okay. Back outside the hearing room for the minimum wage hearing in Augusta, I'm joined by the president of Maine's AFL-CIO, Charlie O'Leary. And Charlie, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Michael.
I'd like to ask you real quickly, why is it that labor is here? Why is this an important issue for unions, given that most union members certainly earn more than the minimum wage?
Well, I think, and I'm going to say now more than ever, it's particularly important that we're here because the changing complexity of government, workers, whether they're working for the minimum or as much as they can get, are underrepresented in the public process. We represent union members, and it's always been our philosophy that if we could increase the minimum wage, that a rising tide lifts all boats. That society and that our people and generally the school system and our communities will all do better. But there is so much emphasis today on business partnerships with government and education, and they never include working people in that. So frequently when we come to the legislative halls, we are the only spokespersons for workers generally, and this is a vital question for us, one of real importance.
Okay, well, I think it's an important thing for our viewers because, you know, this show is seen around the state in various areas as part of public access cable television. And we talk about a lot of worker issues, a lot of labor issues. This is one where we're really talking about a public policy issue and how do we raise living standards in the state of Maine. To those people who say, well, you know, workers want better than minimum wage jobs, they ought to negotiate with their employers for them. How do you respond to that, given that how many people don't have the benefit of union representation?
What labor needs more than anything else now is probably something akin to the civil rights movement. Because you're right, labor does not have the right to organize without litigation for years and years. We don't have the right to strike. We do have the right to strike, and we can't be fired, but we can be replaced. So we have sort of a paradox about what are the rights of workers today. And I think it's important to realize that that we represent working people, and that we are now probably more important than we were at any time in the history of the labor movement. People say that we are at the depths, that unions are on their way out, and so on and so forth. I tend to believe that this is the period of resurgence when we've gone so far with workers being underrepresented on things like minimum wage, on decency, on fair housing in our communities, all of these things, that it's important that we represent workers.
I think one thing I'd just say to our viewers, and then we'll go back into the hearing, is if you spend any time up here in Augusta, and I know you do, Charlie, here in the legislature, if people spend any time in Washington, D.C., now more than ever, people don't have many friends up here. Working people don't have a lot of friends in elected office. There are some, and we count on them a lot, and they do a great job, but people need to build organizations from the grassroots that are going to represent them, and that's what we're about. That's what unions are about in the state of Maine. So
politicians are all too willing to reach out to the local businessman, but not to the local people that are workers, and we have sort of become the pariah. We're going to change that because politicians are elected to represent all of the people, and working people are more important now. They have families, they live in our communities, and they are our communities. They're what makes up the state of Maine, not giant international corporations. So we got some work to do, and we're looking forward to it.
good. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Michael.
And let's head on back in and pick up where we left off with the hearing to raise the minimum wage in Maine. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Mark Muddy, and I represent the Roman Catholic Bishop of Portland. Today, I also represent the Coalition for Economic Justice, a new organization whose aim is to educate people in Maine about poverty issues, its root causes, and meaningful welfare reform. The Catholic Diocese is the founding member of this organization. I come here today in support of both LD 143, an act to increase the minimum wage in Maine, and LD 265, an act to provide cost of living adjustments to minimum wage earners. As you well know, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Portland has a long history of advocacy for measures that serve to uplift the living standards of working people in society. Our position is deeply rooted in the Catholic Church's belief that productive work with wages and benefits that permit a family to live in dignity is a goal we as a society must strive and work towards. I think that all of us here today are well aware of the fact that many, if not most employees in minimum wage paying jobs are not seeking extra spending money. Rather, these jobs are for them their prime livelihood. Even if both spouses are working for minimum wage, their revenues fall far short of what is required to meet even one's basic human needs. We recognize that raising the minimum wage from $4.25 an hour to $5 an hour is no panacea for the low-wage earner. However, it is a step in the right direction in our common effort to raise the living standard for some of Maine's most vulnerable citizens. Although we do not profess to be experts in the field of economics, there does seem to be ample evidence that the minimum wage value is extremely low in America as well as in Maine. In fact, according to the Center for Budget Policy Priority in Washington, D.C., the minimum wage is currently 38% of the average wage. The center further states that, and I quote, even if inflation continues at a moderate pace, the purchasing power of the minimum wage will soon drop to its lowest level since President Eisenhower's first term, end quote. Furthermore, contrary to popular opinion, studies have indicated that modest increases in the minimum wage do not have an adverse effect on the business climate. Richard Freeman of Harvard University who's extensively studied the effects of the minimum wage on the economy, concludes that, and I quote, moderate increases in the minimum wage transferred income to the lower paid employee without obvious adverse effects on employment as a whole, end quote. It is our conclusion that a modest increase in the minimum wage is indeed in order for Maine. Its effects on the economy, it seems, would be negligible, yet its effects on low-income workers significant, both symbolically and in real-life terms. We urge you to send both LD 143 and LD 265 out of committee, ought to pass, for the benefit of Maine's lowest paid workers.
Questions?
Yeah, Roland Sampson from Jay. Being in, working for the Catholic Church, do you see any correlation between low-income wage earners and social problems as far as families go?
Yes, I think we see that consistently. Certainly, not being able to provide for your family a basic subsistence level creates frustration and leads to social problems. I think that's been well documented.
Further questions? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Senator Bagley, Representative Hatch. My name is Tom Ewell. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches, and I'm here to support the legislation to increase the minimum wage. I'm not going to read my testimony, although it was brief, because I believe that we have adequately covered both the strong support, research support, and the human factor that we're considering today. The Maine Council of Churches has been consistent in its support to stand with people who are low income, and this is one effort to do that today. The principle that we hold here is the basic principle of human dignity, and the preference, of course, for people to have a job that supports them at least to the point where they can have a decent standard of living and not be dependent on public welfare. And as other proponents have stated, this $5 or cost of living index is not going to support that, the difference between minimum wage and the $21,000 or so that's research has shown is needed. But it is a step in the right direction, and I would urge as strongly as I can your support for an increase in minimum wage.
Questions? Hearing none, thank you, sir. Did you sign it?
My name is Laura Portman, and I'm speaking here today in support of this legislation for the Maine Women's Lobby. And actually, I'd like to address both pieces of legislation around minimum wage. You've already heard today, I do have prepared testimony, but I will not read from it. I've already listened to quite a bit today, and I just want to touch on a couple of key points. One of the things that you've already heard is the fact that the minimum wage does affect women in greater degree than it affects men. Mike Hillard from the university said that it was about 62% of minimum wage workers are women. My interest in this issue comes from working on economic issues for women and looking at one issue in particular, welfare reform, and Representative Treat already discussed that with you. One of the ways that we tried getting some concrete information on economics and women and welfare was that the Women's Development Institute, which is a sister organization of the lobby, did a survey this fall of 3,000 current AFDC recipients here in our state. I know several people were concerned about, what's happening in Maine and how does this affect us in particular. Of those 3,000 recipients, 929 responded to our survey. And what was significant, we were asking about work history, educational background, things like that. And women were clustered into 3 fairly low-wage occupations, which is not surprising. What was surprising was that 19% of these people were working for minimum wage. And we're talking about single parents here. You've already heard from some people discussing the high cost of child care. But these are folks who are trying to support themselves and their children on $170 a week. It can't be done. Not only can it not be done, the increase, as you've already heard too, of up to $5 an hour is not going to allow them to support themselves and their families. So someone said, so why? Why bother doing this? I think the reason that we bother doing this is it does, as people have already indicated, put us in the right direction. That work should matter. I think Representative Windsor, you had asked, okay, so if they start losing dollar for dollar, what incentive is there to go ahead and to get a job anyhow? What we found is that people want to work. And I think that that's part of that incentive. You talked about having work for minimum wage jobs. I've done it too. And I think that many of us feel that going to work, and the people in our survey said the same thing, that they do want to work, that does provide an inherent value to them. But we also need to be able to help people as they're doing this. That based on information that we've heard from other people, increasing the minimum wage or indexing it is not going to hurt business. It does make a substantial difference, though, to a woman who's trying to support herself and her children. That extra 75 cents an hour can make a big difference in her ability to meet the needs of her children. And that's why the Women's Lobby, along with the Coalition for Economic Justice and the other folks that you've heard here today, are strongly urging your support for this. I would like to also pass out some copies.
Bath Iron Works, and a member of the Legislative Committee of Local S6, International Association of Machinists. I wasn't expecting to talk here today. I basically came to listen, as a number of members of our committee did. But there's a topic that I just want to touch briefly on, because it needs a little bit of attention. And that is concepts of economic development strategies. I was very involved in the unsuccessful struggle to defeat NAFTA and GATT. And in the process of that, became aware of a number of economic development issues. And key to that all is we're really, in this nation and in this state, facing a real choice in what kind of economic development strategies are we going to be following. We can follow the low-wage strategy of competition in a race to the bottom with Mexico and Singapore and China. We'll lose both competitively and we'll lose the race besides. And we will get to the bottom, though, and people will all lose. The other strategy is a high-wage, high-performance, high-skill strategy, which we in Local 6 and Bath Iron Works are involved in pursuing. This really is the only strategy that shows any potential for winning in economic competition. How does this relate to the minimum wage? Well, the lower the floor, the stronger the pressures to lower it even further. And people will just continue to lose. And thank you for your time.
Now, are there any questions of the gentleman? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Thank you, sir.
Senator Begley, Representative Hatch, members of the Joint Standing Committee on Labor. My name is Peter Gore, and I'm here representing the Maine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I'm going to speak at this point to just 265 because I have some different testimony for 143. I will be brief. We believe that Maine's ability to effectively compete with other New England states and the rest of the Northeast would be impacted if this bill were to pass. Opportunities to attract new companies and to retain existing jobs could be damaged, and the prospect of expanded growth could be additionally hampered. We believe tying minimum wage to the consumer price index guarantees wage increases regardless of economic trending. In a depressed economy, businesses who are struggling for survival will be forced to pass on the cost of those increased wages in the form of increased prices, thereby making a bad economy worse. It's also likely that business expansion in the form of new jobs could be impacted, particularly in small businesses, because money used in the past for growth would be budgeted for those automatic wage adjustments. As somebody did say previously, President Clinton has proposed a nationally phased-in increase in the minimum wage for the next 3 years. The Maine Chamber of Commerce believes that this proposal needs to be decided before Maine acts unilaterally. We believe this particular approach would seriously impact our economy, and we would urge this committee to give an on not to pass recommendation for this bill.
Questions?
Yes,
First, I'm not I'll propose this by, I'm not an economist, but we'll go from there.
well, this is not a complicated economic question.
Sure.
It's pretty simple. Will the Chamber of Commerce support a national increase in the minimum wage?
I spoke to our
legislative
committee, and if that was approved, then that would be something more likely to support. Yes, if that was approved at the national level.
I don't know if that. No.
Certainly, go ahead.
I don't think that. The question was, would the Chamber of Commerce, to your knowledge, is probably something that we haven't discussed. Actively pursue passage of the national minimum wage, which, according to your testimony, you said that would be certainly preferable to.
Right, we would prefer not to see Maine act alone. I can't tell you whether we have not asked our membership that answer to that question.
So possibly before the work session, you might be.
I would be glad to do that. I would.
See what you can find
sure,
out.
Sure, I'll poll our specific legislative committee on that question.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what kind of out-of-state low-income jobs are we trying to attract?
I guess I would turn to, in my next testimony, I'm going to talk a little bit about the United States Labor Department statistics. 1993 Bureau of Labor Statistics show job growth, in particularly New Hampshire, which is considered to be one of our primary economic competitors, at 2.8% or 15.8%. Maine ranked 39th with a 1.3% job increase. It's the signal that it sends out that it may impact that.
Will attracting more low-income jobs up that figure?
I can't answer that question.
Further questions?
Yes.
I just want to follow up on Representative Sampson, and I don't want to put you on the spot.
My name is Susan Hawks, and I am the state director of the National Federation of Independent Business in Maine. We represent over 7,000 small businesses throughout the state. And I'm here today to oppose LD 265 as well as LD 143. I would like to stand here at this time just to be on the record in opposition to LD 265. I will reserve my remarks on what will be until later, but I would certainly be here to answer your questions that have come up at this point.
Any questions?
We can wait.
Jim McGregor, I'm Director of Governmental Affairs for the Maine Merchants Association. We have approximately 3,000 members, primarily in the retail sector. The Maine Restaurant Association is an affiliate of ours and has an additional 500 members. We're here today to oppose LD 265. Don't want to rehash too much of what's been said. I think the primary focus of my opposition at this time is a suggestion that we wait to see what happens at the federal level. More and more of my members, and I think we have to look beyond just the minimum wage issue, my members are haunted more and more these days of differences in federal requirements and state requirements. Things like handicapped access, family medical leave, where there's big differences between the state requirements and the federal requirements, and the state requirements usually being more stringent than the federal requirements. So it's very difficult for me to assess the minimum wage thing by itself. I think one thing, I don't know that it's been discussed, that the committee ought to consider in its deliberations of this issue, I think a couple of years ago when this committee and the business community was struggling with the whole issue of youth employment and youth wages and youth hours, that we made some very meaningful progress in expanding the hours that young people can work in the summer and showing what hours they can work during school. But one of the things that was given up in that deliberation was the so-called youth minimum wage, where young people could be started at a lower level. So in effect, Maine no longer has that, and a large percentage, and I can't tell you the percentage, but a large percentage of the minimum wage people are people in this category that are working at the McDonald's and the Burger Kings and these sorts of things. I just think that ought to be taken into consideration. Linda, I know before this is over, you're going to have so many statistics that you won't know what to do with, and you can probably throw the ball out and start all over. One of the ones that strikes me from a congressional.
Okay, we're back outside the hearing room here, outside the Labor Committee, where we've been listening to testimony about the minimum wage in Maine, whether it should be raised or not. And we've had recently a number of opponents of raising the minimum wage testify to how it would be bad for business, how many people would lose their jobs, and what a terrible thing this would be for the state of Maine. I'm joined by a couple of guys who are not opponents, but are in favor of raising the minimum wage. Bert Wartell from Local 6, Ed Gorham from the Maine AFL-CIO. And let me ask you, Ed, to start with, you've heard a lot of this testimony, you've probably heard it for years. Business gets up here and talks about how this would be the end of Western civilization, whatever it might be. Could you respond a little bit to some of the arguments that we've heard from the opponents of raising the minimum wage?
Well, first let me say that I've been here 20 years now. We've gone through a number of fights on minimum wage, and the industrial and business community has come in and opposed them on each and every occasion when they've been offered. It's always been a struggle to get a minimum wage increase through here. In regard to the particular arguments that they offer about acting as a disincentive on job creation, costing jobs, forcing businesses to close, I think that the more recent studies out of both Harvard, MIT, and other places indicate that quite the reverse is true. That as Mike Hillard from USM pointed out, for each $10,000 increase or $100,000 increase in total wages accruing through the minimum wage, there might be one job lost. That seems to me to be pretty small pickings in comparison with the overall benefit that the increase will do for the working poor. I suspect that, although they won't come out and say it directly, that with a lot of these opponents, both institutional opponents and individual opponents of an increase in the minimum wage, they still tend to regard minimum wage workers as the unwashed, unholy, unworthy masses.
That may sad but true. Bert Wartell, you just jumped up. You didn't come up here to testify. I know you were here to listen, but you heard some things and you jumped up and had to say something inside about a choice that Maine has to make about which way we're going to grow our economy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, essentially, not only Maine, but the nation as a whole are facing a choice in how do we deal with and respond to the global economy. And in the global economy, there really are two clear choices shaping up in how you deal with competitive pressures as a society. You can follow the low-wage strategy and participate in what can only be a disastrous race to the bottom against economies like Mexico, Singapore, China. Or you can take the high-wage, high-skill approach, which is to really develop what is really any society's greatest resources, and that is we, the working people, to develop our skills and pay us appropriately for those skills. And in addition to that, it's really a question of humanity. Do we want to relegate people in our neighbors and our brothers and sisters to a life of poverty? Is the nobility of working the be-all and end-all, or don't people deserve to eat as well? And I think that when you talk about not indexing the minimum wage to inflation, what you're talking about is lowering the minimum wage. And these days, $4.25 an hour is it's an absurd wage in the first place. So.
I think most of the opponents inside have admitted when pressed, and Representative Sampson nails them on this very directly. He says, "Is $4.25 a living wage?" And of course, they're forced to admit no, because how could anybody imagine to live on $4.25? Yet, people are being required, if they're going to take a job in Maine, many people are being required to live at $4.25. The other point that I think needs to be reminded here, and I know you guys are aware of this, is that because the minimum wage hasn't been indexed, hasn't kept up with the cost of living over the years, that we now have 21% of our population earning less than what the minimum wage should be had it been pegged to inflation 20 years ago. If we were still paying minimum wage at the level that it should have been, that it was being paid at 20 years ago, we've got over 20% of our population trying to make ends meet and raise families that way. So
Mike, if I might hop in, one of the things I think that has come out in the hearing as well is that there are very few manufacturing jobs left in Maine that pay minimum wage. Far and away the greatest and overwhelming majority of people earning minimum wage are in the service sector. And those are exactly the types of businesses or industries, if you will, that do not lend themselves to closing down and relocating to another jurisdiction. You don't move a local family restaurant out of town to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You don't move a hospital out of Bangor to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You don't move any other kind of a service establishment, an ongoing service establishment in a community to another state because of an increase in the minimum wage.
I guess I was just going to say, in addition to that, another side of that same issue, because they have been raising that in there about competition with other states in New England. Well, from our perspective, in Call to Action, certainly, which is the organization of unions in the defense industries throughout New England, we're working very hard on a coordinated program to stop that kind of rating from state to state, both in terms of the issues of wages and of economic development funding and everything, and the minimum wage, of course, can and must be part of that same thing. The point is to coordinate more so that we all rise, not compete ourselves in a race to the bottom.
Well, that's what we're doing here again today, folks. You've got people from the Maine AFL-CIO, the Maine Council of Churches, Maine Women's Lobby, other organizations that are here on behalf of working people who can't be here, who are stuck working at minimum wage jobs and just above, to try to raise the standard of living so that we can find that Maine is on the move. And let's us move on back into the hearing room.
Let's do it.
Pick it up. Okay. Outside the hearing room, the Labor Committee hearing room here at the state capitol. The legislature is hearing the bill on raising the minimum wage. I'm joined by two members of the committee, Representative Pam Hatch of Skowhegan, who is the House Chair of the Labor Committee, and Senator Ann Rand of Portland, who is a member of the Labor Committee. And let me ask both of you, I know you have to get back into the hearing quickly, but as far as the testimony you're hearing so far, what are the items that really stick out in your mind as to the arguments in favor of raising Maine's minimum wage?
Well, I think that the most overwhelming argument in favor of raising minimum wage is the linkage to the work to welfare. Mm-hmm. We're all talking about welfare reform and how we accomplish this. And from my perspective, certainly a health care proponent has to be in there, a health insurance proponent, and something that comes at least near a living wage. And although $5 an hour, which is what one of the bills proposes, does not produce a living wage, it certainly leads us in the right direction toward that.
Mm-hmm. And Pam, now you've heard testimony in there from both the proponents and the opponents, and I know you're the chair and you're keeping an open mind, so I don't want to put you on the spot unless you want to be there, but what do you find compelling in terms of the arguments of either side?
The arguments of either side, personally to me, would probably be the ones that the proponents for it. Here we have a group very diversified coming down to testify in favor of this. And then we have the merchants and retailers and the business owners who come down on the other side. Mm-hmm. And I find that the case that the proponents are making in regards to the opponents at this point is much clearer. Mm-hmm. The only thing that we're getting from the opponents on the bill is that, no, we can't do this and let's wait for the federal. Well, we all know by past history, that if we wait for the federal, we probably won't have health care, and we probably won't have a minimum wage bill.
Yeah, that seems like an easy out. I noticed in the, I don't know whether we picked up on the camera before, but the opponent who was representing the Chamber of Commerce made the statement that the Chamber of Commerce would prefer to see the federal go first. And Senator Rand, you asked him as to whether the Chamber of Commerce was then prepared to support the federal.
Actively support the federal increase.
And what would you say happened when you asked the representative that?
Well, I think that I got a very cloudy answer, and then when pressed, he decided that he would check with his membership again and see if he could bring an answer back to the work session, which is, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I'd say from this reporter's viewpoint, he looked a bit uncomfortable when asked if the chamber was ready to support a federal increase. Sometime soon, people should have an opportunity to contact their senators and representatives to let them know how they feel. I don't know when this bill will be voted on by the full legislature, but assumedly somewhere over the course of the next month or two, right? So you can call either Senator Ann Rand in Portland or Representative Pam Hatch, but more importantly, call your own senator or representative. Let them know how you feel about raising the minimum wage. Thank you both for joining me, and go on back in.
Okay.
Get back to work.
Okay.
And so we've seen and heard hours of discussion and debate about whether Maine should raise its minimum wage. The people that we've been meeting with today are legislators, state senators and representatives, as well as citizens who've come to speak about for and against raising our minimum wage. This show has been shot on location here in Augusta, Maine, standing in front of our state capitol on a cold and ever colder February afternoon. The legislature will consider this in the Labor Committee. The Labor Committee will be voting later this month as to whether or not to recommend raising the minimum wage in Maine. The full legislature won't vote on this for some time to come. So there's opportunity for you, the citizens, the viewers, working people in the state of Maine, to let your voices be heard and let your opinions be known about this important issue. Call your representative, call your legislator. Better yet, come on up to Augusta, let them know how you feel. This is going to wrap it up for this edition of Cavanaugh's Corner. We'll be back and in future editions have a chance to talk about the outcome of this and other pieces of legislation that will affect workers. Thanks a lot. I'm out of here. I'm cold.
He said that he could predict for every dollar that was taken away from mothers on welfare, how many new prisoners over the time would be coming in state prison. That's a pretty terrible investment, I would say. And he said that flat out to me. Another question answered, one that you all have. Well, if there is general assistance money going to support businesses as a subsidy, is that really, really true? And how much is it? I can't tell you exactly how much it is, but again, in one of my hairy conversations with the director of welfare in the city of Portland, she said to me at the time that fully 50% of all of the people who come to get general assistance in the city of Portland are working people, are people receiving minimum wage. So you really are subsidizing